Hi everyone, my name is Walaa Hajali, and I would like to share some of my research on water commons in Damascus, in the city of Damascus, titled Violated Water. I began this work with the intention of investigating solutions related to the water stress in the urban fabric surrounding Damascus. However, it quickly became clear to my mind that I couldn't meaningfully research solutions without understanding first how the river ended up within its current condition. And this shifted my approach. Instead of focusing only on the present day facts of the river, I started to read the river as a long-term system shaped by layered environmental, political, and urban transformations. And as part of the KAF theme, the city after, this research evolved into an inquiry into what causes crisis and what follows. Firstly, I would like to also talk a bit about my position in this research. Because I work in Germany, in my daily work, I work in Transsolar Klimaengineering in Stuttgart, and in my daily work, I work between architecture and climate engineering, where I translate complex climate data into urban strategies and sustainable urban strategies. But as a Syrian architect, I'm constantly navigating between these two very different realities, let's say. The high-performance engineering of what I design, and the fragile urban realities of my home country. And this contrast drives my interest into the relationship between the natural environment and the urban infrastructure, and how even this natural environment shapes the social dynamic and urban infrastructure, and is it also it's shaped by it. Yes, and one of my work focuses is water. Also, when I work at Transsolar, I work mostly with, for example, with water management or using water as a mediator in the thermal dynamic. But beyond being a technical element, I began to ask, what does water reveal about the city, and what transformations does it carry over time? And I would like to share a very short video I filmed last December in Damascus, capturing an everyday moment in a neighborhood on the river of Barada. It's a simple moment, but it offers a grounded glimpse into what drives my motivation to do this research. Observing similar scenes across different parts of the city of Damascus prompted me to further investigate the Barada River, which is the main river in Damascus. And it leads to the central question of my research about the relationship between the river and the city, and how can the river be both victim and at the same time witness to the fragile urban realities. I took inspiration from two main theoretical concepts, because I see also, even when I'm talking about a site-specific concern, it's still within a broader urgencies, let's say. And I took inspiration from two main concepts. Firstly, the Rob Nixon and his book about slow violence, where he argues that harm usually produced through not only through specular events like wars or infrastructural collapses, but also harm can be understood as the outcome of the longer sequences of ordinary decisions. And slow violence is not only understood in temporal terms, but also spatial. And it's embedded in the urban infrastructures that disrupt the ecological continuity. Secondly, also De Kuyter, he talked about, and his writings about the new fear, where he talks about how the modern era now thinking in a capsular logic. So they usually separate inside from outside, inside the building from outside the building, inside the city from the surrounding. And this also can be understood in creating harm in less visible urban environments where certain uncertainty is displayed. And in order to understand how a living system was turned into a corridor of sacrifice, the Barada River can be read in four spatial dimensions, let's say. Life, amenity, burden, and sacrifice. How the river turned from commons into a surface, then from surface into an exposure, and from exposure to a downstream loss. First, when we talk about Barada, when water was visible and was cared for, because Barada is a main characteristics from Damascus. Historically, Damascus emerged as an oasis city, and it was always like a continuous negotiation with water. And Barada connect three main landscapes in Damascus. First, the valley or Wadi Barada, and where it's the source and the natural passages where the river come from, and then the city center where the old city also emerged, and thirdly, the hinterland that they are surrounding the city of Damascus, which we call them al-Ghouta, that they kept the city in green. And beyond its engineering function, the river was often praised by poets also for its cold water. So it's also like holds an historical meaning for the city, and it has a deep cultural value since also the Roman period. It was called like the River of Cold. But even here we can see a photograph during for Barada River in the city in the old city of Damascus. Where we can also see during the Ottoman Empire, and the relationship between Damascus and Barada was not only about irrigation and drinking water, but the river also was the city refugee for relief. And it was really clear in the upstream landscape in Wadi Barada, where a culture of recreation took root, and it was shaped by shade, seating, and the public pleasure of water as a presence. Even in the city of Damascus, in the old houses, Barada entered each house of the city actually. Through the vernacular architecture, we have always like a fountain in the courtyard, and this is not only an ornament, but also like the final destination of a pipe work, allowing the river to present within each house in the city. Downstream in Al-Ghouta, also life was equally bound to the flow, and the same channels that sustained Damascus also fed fields and villages, and they inhabited daily routines. However, beneath this abundance, a quiet transformation was unfolding. The river that once carried life began gradually to carry something else, the weight of service. And when we move from this ideal of life into the reality of amenity, the relationship begins to change. And this assembly of fragility can be read through the beginning of the modern planning of the city of Damascus. Under the French mandate, during the French mandate in the 1930s, the expansion of Damascus was shaped by a French planner called Michel Ecochard, and he proposed like a plan for Damascus, where he also rendered the river of Damascus that it should be cleaned and it should be hygiene. And at the same time, he mentioned that the hinterland of Damascus as a site devoid of culture and one of the pure extraction. And this shaped how river was imagined, in my opinion. And this imagination can be reflected also through the lens of environmental Orientalism, where we usually like stereotyping non-Western environments and overlooking continuity. And this agenda of security, hygiene, order it made the river as an object for modernization that should be cleaned and it should be flattened. And this continuity of this three landscapes, valley, old city, and Ghouta, it was kind of like flattened, and like these zones were treated separately, even like in the future of Damascus. But not only the planning like of Damascus contributed to recreating or reimagining Barada, but also we see in the 30s signs of decline were already visible. So at the upstream landscape, what began as modest cafes, it was also it was ended up with an intensive land filling of spring basins. And it was also but it was always presented as improvements to the river, and it was created as expansion on the recreation amenities that they were there. However, these practices concealed the hydrological consequences of the river, and the active springs were buried, and the water was forced to reroute invisibly. Unfortunately, by the late 20th century. Planning strategies repeatedly distracted the historical continuum of the valleys, Damascus and Al-Ghouta. And amenity here is understood as the spatial and the political precondition of burden, when harm is embedded in governance and infrastructure before it's recognized as a sacrifice. Later, environmental harm becomes lived and normalized, where the river becomes a burden to the city itself. In Damascus, we see burden intensified in the city, where especially in the upper class neighborhoods, through a technocratic improvements, let's say, that they usually reorganize the river even as a controlled corridor. So there was a lot of paving and sealing sections of the river in order to control its flow. However, this it was justified as a maintenance and control, but these measures accelerated the flow and reduced infiltration of the river. And cleaning here becomes political. It organized surfaces while dismantling the ecological life. Downstream in Al-Ghouta, burden was also lived as a double bind, less water but worse water. Also here it's important to mention that since the 1970s, during the Assad era, or the political control of Assad on Syria, there was a systematically the collective stewardship of common spaces was also changing. So even our relationship to the river or to the urban commons was also changing, and this also has had consequences not only from regarding mismanagement, but also redistributing the environmental rights, who's protected and who's exposed and who losses remain unseen. By the time of the Syrian uprising, which started in 2011, these burdens were also firmly political. Water infrastructure became strategic terrain. Between 2015 and 2017, severe damage caused to Al-Fija Spring. Al-Fija Spring in the upstream terrain, and these areas in Wadi Barada, they were widely associated with the opposition against Assad, and they became sites of control over water. By 2017, they became also an instrument of siege and bargaining and survival. Until residents were forcibly displaced to Idlib in the northern part of Syria. In 2018, there was an agreement with the support of Russia. However, in order for residents to return to their houses, however, the Assad found another way actually to prevent people to return. So they were changing the legal and planning frameworks. So, for example, they amended a law that it doesn't allow people to build close to the river, and it also enabled expropriation of private lands close to the springs. And this caused also like a lot of also like consequences for the residents, and it affected the displaced community actually from returning to their homes. In Al Ghouta, the towns were also on the front line of in the front line in opposition also to the Assad. And therefore, the violence was intense in the neighborhoods in Al Ghouta, and damage to the infrastructure and the accumulation of rubble was affected also, was affecting the water circulation and the maintenance. And it also it affected the burdens caused by scarcity of water, but also contamination. Consequently, water scarcity and contamination became deeply connected with the violence itself. And it kind of also positioned Al Ghouta as the outside, according to the counter concept, absorbing the city, transferring harm. Observing the river in its current condition reveals a sacrifice state for me. So I'm gonna share some photos. I had a field visit to Damascus between December and January this year. And I just encountered with the river, and I followed the river from Wadi Barada to Al Ghouta, trying to understand its different spatial conditions, which is no longer treated as a living system, but merely to absorb and transport waste. And it's important also to mention here that while the spatial continuation of the river on official maps of Damascus still acknowledge the historical presence of the river of Barada, but it appears on the ground as a discontinuous corridor of water. And it's important here for me to kind of challenge the authority of the map as an official representation of urban and ecological systems. The river is shown as one continuous line from Al-Wadi to Al Ghouta. However, on the ground, it shows different realities and different landscapes. And for example, upstream in Barada Valley, we see here that the contamination of the river becomes ordinary long before it becomes politically visible, due to the population growth and urban expansion combined with the profit-driven urbanism. It also enabled the private estates and businesses to discharge wastewater into the river without even accountability. And we see, in the residential areas in Wadi Barada, we see the absence of adequate sewage. So the household wastewater is fed into Barada directly, even making these communities part of the pollution pathway, but even they live with its consequences. In the city center, across the urban core of Damascus, ecology became infrastructure. And water visibility was something secured within concrete boundaries, while the river is treated in certain spaces as a hydraulic inconvenience, let's say. And it was hidden under urban networks. And we see that the river here is kind of in a better situation, however, with the sealed sections also along the main streets in Damascus, and especially in the upper class neighborhoods. However, still in the city center, in the hidden urban infrastructure of the city, we see different situation of the river. Harm accumulates here gradually and through neglect and through waste and discharging and untreated residential and industrial waste. While we see also what we see within with the Barada River is a process of the spatial marginalization. And it's kind of a disconnection of the from the city itself. Downstream in Al Ghouta, the Barada River increasingly survives on wastewater, unfortunately, and the storm runoff, rather than becoming a natural flow. And in the dry periods, it becomes an exposed and contaminated channel, carrying what the city cannot hold. And the agriculture lands is heavily affected as well, because of polluted water, but also like what we see here, like with these foams, is because of the chemical discharge water from the industry. And at the urban edge of Damascus, unregulated industry activities add further pressure on the river. In this way, the environmental burden of the city is displaced toward Al-Ghouta, which functions as the outside. Also here, I would like to show a short video of one area of the river. Where we see also here waste and foams as part of the river. Barada manifests multiple urban conditions along its course through Damascus, reflecting both ecological vulnerability and urban governance. And I think the biography of Barada indicates how fear is built and embedded in logics that prioritize security and central security mainly, while externalizing the risk and at the same time neglecting the impact of short-term decisions on the river continuity over time. However, an architecture of care challenged this logic by focusing on rivers as a living infrastructures, and care here seeks not only maintenance and repair, but also spatial and political practices that prioritize vulnerability, interdependence, and continuity over time. And we can see also after the fall of Assad, there is many initiatives also like calling for restoring Barada and from municipalities and even like from people, but repair extends beyond isolated actions, and it's where responsibility can be redistributed through space, and mainly to reorient the question from how the city can control environmental instability to how it can live with its challenges, but collectively. Thank you.